Now that we've added the fake handheld camera effect to our scene, we're ready to add some motion blur, some more camera lens blur, and some global color correction and grain in order to really make this effect convincing. You can also open the Part 5 project file and just start from there. Let's start with motion blur. Don't be confused by the blur category in the list of effects. That won't do what we need here. We want geometric motion blur, which After Effects can calculate based on the motion of the elements in a comp. To turn it on, you use two switches, and you need to make sure your timeline is showing switches by clicking the toggle button down here. First, there's the motion blur switch for the layer. Second, there's the master motion blur switch, which needs to be turned on for the comp right here. Now that both switches are on, if you drag the time indicator around, you can see that blur is being added as the background layer whips around the scene. Next, we want to add a few more effects to really sell the scene, and for that we'll use an adjustment layer. As in Photoshop or Premiere Pro, an adjustment layer is basically an invisible control layer that lets you apply effects to it, and those effects will apply to everything that's visible below the adjustment layer in stacking order. And the adjustment layer will be especially useful in this comp since we only want to calculate effects on this smaller 1280 by 720 window. Whereas if we applied an effect directly to the 4K background layer, it would be much slower to calculate since that background layer is so large. So the adjustment layer is more convenient, and in this case will save us a lot of render time as well. The first new effect to add will be our friend the camera lens blur effect. I'll initially set the blur to 0. But during the first pan to the UFO, I want to quickly animate a blur effect to help simulate the autofocus of a camera. Notice there's a stopwatch in the effect panel to turn on animation, just like in the timeline. So I'll animate from 0 up to 40 and back down initially. And then, at the end of the timeline, I'll go from 0 up to 15 and back to 0. Now here's a cool tip. Once you've set keyframes for a property, tapping the U key will reveal just the animated properties in a layer. Now you can fine-tune. For example, I'll select just this one keyframe, copy it, and paste it a few frames later to hold the camera out of focus for a few extra frames. Another cool thing about the camera lens blur effect is that it allows you to amplify the highlights of a scene, which is a useful trick for unifying the brights of different composited elements. A value of 10 will help the moon look a little more luminous, as well as pumping up the city lights. You'll have to bring down the threshold a little bit in this scene to reveal it. In fact, during our final zoom, we can animate the gain up to, say, 50 to simulate the camera re-exposing itself after a zoom. Applying a uniform color wash to the whole scene will further help the different elements to look like they belong together. Let's add a photo filter, set to a cooling preset, with a density of about 20% to help with that. Now let's add a subtle layer of additional noise. Maybe 10%, just to add a tiny bit of chatter that'll help stitch everything together. And finally, add the audio file that I've provided to help sell that this is a real event being witnessed by off-camera civilians. After you save the project, you'll be ready to export a finished movie.